Worship. This morning's message is intended to be a very practical lesson on the subject of communication. I honestly believe you can take this to the bank. Good communication is literally the key to marriage. I honestly believe that. If you've got good communication, you've got a good marriage. If you've got good communication, you've got a good marriage. But if you don't have good communication, it's a high probability that you don't have a good marriage. You just don't. The deal is this, and I want you to remember this first truth this morning. It's going to be up on the screen. Communication is the superhighway that love flows on. Now, nobody in this room likes to be in a traffic jam. I mean, we become different people in a traffic jam, don't we? But communication is the superhighway which love flows on. If you've got a good highway of communication, then the love between the husband and the wife is going to freely flow. Over the years, I've watched many couples, many husbands and wives in our churches, and I know that they love God. And I know that they love each other, but they don't know how to communicate. And because they do not know how to communicate, suddenly that love ceases to flow between them. Good folks, if there's one thing I want to urge you this morning in this lesson, everybody in this room must learn to communicate. Realize poor communication is the detriment of so many relationships. It's a detriment of marriages. It's a detriment of families. Yes, it is the detriment of churches. I've seen churches that were stunted in their growth because of lack of communication. Certainly, communication is key in business. Your favorite sports team. Poor communication is the detriment of all aspects of life, requiring that we relate to someone else. When you are challenged to relate to another person, you've got to have good communication. And our second truth is this: if you don't know how to communicate, all you're left with are a lot of assumptions. Some of those dangerous minefields that we walk across in our life are when we placed all these assumptions that we walk along and just wait to step on the wrong one. For an illustration, there was a man who was walking in his neighborhood, and he saw one of his neighbors struggling to get a refrigerator through the door of his house. So he walks over and he asks the neighbor, he says, "Can I help you out?" And the neighbor says, "Sure, man, I'm really struggling with this thing." So the man gets on one side and the other gentleman on the other side of the refrigerator, and they begin to pull and tug on the fridge for a few minutes until one of the men exasperatedly says, "I don't think that we're going to get this refrigerator in your house." And the other guy says, "In the house? I'm trying to get it out of the house." And that right there, that illustration shows our problem. We don't communicate. We just assume. And so we have a lot of wrong assumptions in our life. Now I want you to create that picture in your mind. How many times have you found yourself on the wrong end of an assumption? And you know how it feels to go, "Well, I thought that was the right thing." And you make an assumption that ends up being absolutely false. So right there is our problem. We don't communicate the way we ought to, so all we're left with is a lot of assumptions in our life. And that is especially true in our marriages. We think, I use the phrase "we think" because we think in our marriages that we're communicating, but the truth is, we're just not. The third truth this morning is this: you can say all the right words. You can say all the right words. Make every point as clear as you possibly can and still not be communicating. In fact, there are statistics that go along regarding communication. They're going to be up on the screen here. And these communications go along with a certain type of communication. Let's say that you go up to somebody and you look at them and you begin to talk with them and you say, I don't have a problem with you. Now, but the problem is, while you're walking up to someone and saying, I don't have a problem with you, your arms are crossed and you don't even look them in the eye. What are you really communicating, brethren? You're communicating exactly the opposite of what your words have then addressed. And that's what happens in our communication. When this particular type of communication, 7% of that communication is verbal. You can have the right words, but that's only 7%. Because tone of voice is 38% of communication in these matters. And body language is 55% of communication. So that is a real issue for us. When we communicate with other people, not only do you have to say the right type of words, but your words have to be paralleled by the right type of tone of voice and the right type of body language. All right, there are some of us in this room on this morning, this January 27th of 2019, some of us think that we are great multitaskers. If you were here this weekend, Miss Amy gave us a scientific definition of why certain people are great at multitasking and some of us just aren't. But the truth is, a lot of us think that we're great at multitasking, but we're really not all that good at it at all. For instance, think about in our culture, what is the biggest danger of multitasking that we do on a daily basis? Sadly, too many people still this day try to text and drive. That is dangerous. Somehow, though, we think that we can listen to folks and multitask, but the truth is, we're not really listening. How many of you might be familiar? I was a child of the 80s, okay? I can't help it. I was a child of the 80s, so anything that looks back on the 80s gets my attention. A few years ago, a group came up with a show called Goldberg, and you might see this show, and it's about a family that grew up in the 80s, and every day the dad comes home from work, and he takes off his pants, all he has on is underwear, and he sits down on his recliner with what in hand? Tell me. TV remote. Now, I look at it this way. If I come home from work and I sit down in my recliner and I put on the TV and I'm watching my favorite sporting event and my wife comes home and she begins to tell me about her day and I'm just sitting there like this, just watching that TV. Am I really listening to what my wife has to say? The answer is no. But there's a lot of us fathers in this room that are guilty of believing that we're listening to our wives when we really aren't. And the same applies to a lot of us as wives in this room. You can say the right words, but your body language is communicating just the opposite. The problem with a lot of us in this room, we weren't taught how to communicate. I imagine that there is a high number of us who grew up in homes where we did not witness a good example of communication. So we haven't learned, and I'm going to listen, and I hope you'll listen to this, we haven't learned the skill of communication. That's right, it is a skill. You have to learn, and it's good news. If you're failing this morning with this sermon, the good news is it's a skill you can learn to communicate. So today I want to teach you how. But the first thing we've got to talk about are the levels of communication. You see, we all communicate on differing levels. Even this room, The majority of you in this room on this side may not know everybody on that side. Vice versa. You good folks, the sheep and the goats in the middle. I'm not saying which side is which. The truth is, a lot of us just don't know one another. Even in a congregation of our size, so most people in this room communicate on a fairly shallow level. But you possibly know others a bit better, and you communicate to them on a little bit deeper level. So I want to give you the 5 levels of communication. Now, when a husband and wife are on these lower levels of communication, they're further apart. But the higher they go in their levels of communication, the closer they become. It's a reality that everybody in this room must face. And the first is the stranger level. Basically, that's the phrases, the cliche phrases that we use. Hi, how are you doing? How's your day been? Now, you can converse that way with a stranger, can you not? You can even communicate with a stranger with this. But let me tell you, if that's all you're doing in your marriage is communicating on the stranger level, you and your spouse are worlds apart. In fact, let me put it to you this way. The stranger level is the on-ramp of the highway of communication. That brings us to the second level. That's the facts level. And facts, they give you detailed information such as, honey, you've got a doctor's appointment on Tuesday. Or the power bill is due on Monday. Or the garbage is going to be picked up on Thursday. And most of our communication in our marriages, most of our communication takes place on the facts level. We deal with it on a daily basis. But here's the deal. If you're going to stay in this level of communication, you're never going to feel truly close to your spouse. It's just not going to happen. You've got to get deeper than the stranger level, the facts level. You've got to go beyond that. So let's go to the third level, and that is the opinion level. This is where you start to share your opinions, your ideas, your thoughts on stuff. Like, for instance, I think, honey, this is how we ought to spend our money. Or I think this is how we ought to discipline our kids. I think this is where we ought to go on our vacation. Here's the deal. When you begin to communicate on this level and above, it's a risk. Why is it a risk, you ask? Because when you start sharing your opinions, there's a high probability that eventually your spouse is not going to agree with your opinion. So when you're sharing things on this level, I want you to look at, we talk about walls a lot lately, don't we? This is the wall that stands between a husband and wife that they must cross in order to achieve intimacy in their marriage. You've got to go beyond this. You've got to press through this wall, because on the other side of the wall is the door to true closeness. Why? Because we just don't always agree with one another. That's a fact. In a marriage relationship, your spouse is going to share some opinions that you may disagree with. But what you've got to do, above all things, is you've got to be willing to truly listen. They've got to know that regardless of what their opinion may be, that you're willing to hear them out. You may disagree with their opinions, but they've got to know first and foremost that they've been heard. It's critical to our marriages, brethren, that we be able to have that response between husbands and wives. Once they know they've been heard, then you can proceed to the fourth level, and that is the feelings level. Jonathan, what is the feelings level? Let me tell you. It's where you share your emotions, such as, I'm angry because of this. Or, I felt hurt when you shared that story about me to our friends. Or, I'm worried and stressed by my job. I'm intimidated by my in-laws. Okay, when you say those types of things, you are sharing what is happening with your emotions. Now, my wife, I promised her I wouldn't use her as a big example today, but my wife knows this about me. I'm very thankful that in our marriage, we don't share on the emotional level all of the time, because if we did, I would be a nervous wreck. But we do. Even my wife and I have to get down to sharing our emotions from time to time, because whenever you can share between a husband and a wife what's on your heart, what you are feeling, and your spouse is truly listening to what you have to say, you're going to become closer in your marriage than you've ever been. And now you can move up to the fifth level. And the fifth level is the needs level. It's pretty simple. It's this. You can share openly and honestly and know that you are going to be loved and respected by your spouse. You can say, honey, I need some time with you. Or, I need to know that I am a priority to you. Whatever that need that's addressed in that moment, you're able to share it with your spouse and know that they'll hear it, respect it, and love you. Now, here's the key. The need level. If you can find out, hope you follow me on this because it's very important. If you can find out what your spouse's needs are, even if you disagree with their feelings or their opinions, if you can find out their need, you can resolve the issues that you face. Almost all the conflicts that happen in our marriages. And I guess I must stop and ask, is every marriage in this room, everybody who's married in this room, you've never gotten in a disagreement, you've never had a conflict, right? Never, yeah. That close, that close. Almost all of these conflicts can be resolved if we find out what the real need is. Let me illustrate it to you. Let's say that your mother criticized your wife for her parenting. And your wife comes home and she opens up to you on the needs level and she says, first of all, she says, your mom says that I don't discipline the kids right. The facts level. I don't think your mom likes me. That's what level? The opinion level. I feel really hurt when your mom talks to me like that. The feelings level. I need you to call up your mother and chew her out. That's the needs level. And you as a guy says, time out. I'm not calling my mom up and chewing her out. Besides, to be honest, you are overly sensitive most of the time. And I know my mom loves you because she says she does most of the time. And not only that, you don't always discipline our kids the right way. Whoa. All right, so if the husband responds to the wife in this manner after she's shared these deep levels, what level do you believe they're going to be communicating on now? Level 1, right? Why? Because, brothers, we are in the doghouse. And you know how you're communicating from that point? Hi, how are you doing? Fine. What do you care? What's the bottom line? The bottom line is, she had a need. She needed to know that you as her husband had her back. She needed to know that you love her unconditionally. She needed to know that you believe that she is a good parent. That, my friends, is the need. You can disagree with the feelings and the opinions, but the bottom line is, you as the spouse must meet the needs of the one that God blessed you with in your life. And if you would meet that need, it would resolve the issue. So the key is, we've all got to learn to listen. There's a biblical principle here. It's found in James chapter 1 and verse 19. Look in your Bibles at what it says. But let everyone be quick to hear and slow to speak. Now, if you've never realized this before this morning, I hope you'll realize what God has done. He's given you how many ears? Say it with me. How many ears do you have? 2. How many mouths? 1. So you need to be able to listen twice as much as you talk. I want everybody to do me a favor. I want you to turn to each other. Everybody turn to the person next to you, and I want you to say these words out loud. You've got to learn to listen. All right, that's enough. That's enough. Don't want any fights. See, the problem is, a lot of the time when we're communicating with our spouse, we get a little bit defensive about what they're saying, and then all we're doing while they're talking is thinking about what? How we're going to respond. And once you start thinking about your response, you stop listening. Proverbs 18:13, I love this verse. It says, whoever gives an answer before he listens is both foolish and shameful. Boy, that's a pretty strong verse, isn't it? And guys, we have a tendency to do that. We're problem solvers. So our spouse is sharing something that's on their heart, and we stop listening, and we decide it's our job right then and there to solve the problem. Will you just stop trying to solve the problem and just start listening? Many times, listening is all that our spouse is asking of us. And ladies, you know what your tendency is? Your tendency is to interrupt the husband because he didn't get all the details right. Well, it was Wednesday, not Thursday. We were at Wendy's, not Whataburger. Ladies, can I just tell you? Stop interrupting your husband with the details. God is not going to send any husband to judgment because he got all the details wrong. If you want to get to these 5 levels of communication, you've got to learn to listen. All right, next step. What are the most dreaded words in all of marriage? You want to know what they are? Honey, we need to talk. Huh? I'll leave work right now. I'm coming. Because at that moment, we know that our spouse is going to go beyond the stranger and the facts level, and we're going to be dealing with opinions, feelings, or needs, and that gets our attention. So those are the 5 levels of communication. But now let's talk about principles of communication. What are the principles? Now, thank you once again for the reading of Scripture, because Ephesians chapter 4 gives us these 4 principles. Number 1, everybody in this room, we've got to first be honest. We've got to practice honesty. Speak the truth in love. Now, you know what I've discovered? Speaking the truth is easy. Speaking in love is easy. Speaking the truth in love is hard. Let's say that your wife comes to you and says, "Honey, do I look like I've gained weight?" Speaking the truth, easy. Speaking in love is easy, but speaking the truth in love in that situation ain't ever easy, is it? "Well, honey, you have gained a lot of weight. What's your problem?" "Well, my problem is I'm married to a lazy bum. That's my problem." Speaking the love is easy. "Oh, you're wonderful. You're so wonderful." But it's hard to speak the truth in love. But here's how you do it. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to share what I entitled withholds. Withholds. You might ask, what is a withhold? That means that at any given time in your week, your spouse is going to do or say something that bothers you. Instead of bearing those things, take a moment, husbands and wives, one moment every week to share together with love and truth those situations that come up in your marriage. Too many times we bury them deep and we wait until the right moment and we bring them out as ammunition, don't we? Don't do that. Be willing to share those withholds. Number 2, deal with anger in an appropriate fashion. If there is a destructive emotion in marriage, it is anger. But Paul, go back and read Ephesians 4, 26 through 27, because that's how we're told to deal with our anger. Did you know that 70% of depression is caused by unresolved anger? We push the anger down like a ticking time bomb until it explodes. Verse 27 says, "Give no opportunity to the devil." Now, a lot of us don't think about our marriage in the spiritual realm, but there it is. I'm telling you that anger will wreak havoc in your marriage, and those emotions will wreak havoc if you're not dealing with your anger appropriately. So you say, "Jonathan, how do I deal with this anger that I have?" Share some "I feel" messages, that level of communication. Normally, when we get angry, we don't share, we command. And that wreaks havoc. Third, practice positively. Practice being positive in your relationship. Go back and read Ephesians 4:29, brethren. You know, because the truth is, cold words can freeze people, hot words can scorch people, bitter words can destroy people, but kind words can heal. And I don't have to say this because y'all are all so mature. No name calling. No name calling in your marriage. These put downs, these sarcastic comments, they never accomplish the task of building up your spouse. Instead, it puts up that traffic jam in the highway of love between you and your spouse. And finally this morning, fourth, be forgiving. Be the first person in your marriage that is willing to say, I am sorry. Remember Matthew 6:14, if you forgive others, you will be forgiven. If you do not, neither will he forgive you. So these this morning were the principles, the four principles of communication. We've talked about the levels of communication. I pray that this morning you'll put these things to work in your marriage. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, if we can help you in any manner, would you come now as we stand and sing?